So, good morning. My name is Sarah, and we're going to discuss the subject of perception, which is such an interesting subject. My background is in art and design, so I think I've been thinking on this subject for a long time, the art of perception. And I've become aware recently of how powerful and important perception is, to be aware of the fact we have one and that we have a choice and maybe opportunity to shift our perspective as well. And so today it would be nice to explore this subject to see how we can adapt ourselves and how it may be useful in our world and our experience. And obviously, in the context of meditation, it's a useful tool. And so we're going to have a few slides and some food for thought, something to reflect on this subject, to add to probably you've already got lots of reflections on it. And we're going to start with looking at an image of an art exhibition. This was in the Hayward Gallery maybe 10 years ago. And the artist is called Dan Flavin. He was a light artist. And very simple setup. You would go into the room and it would be flooded with a green light and a sort of an attractive display of fluorescent bulbs. Simple. But when you walked into the next room, you're flooded by a different color. So it might be a yellow light. And when you first go in, it doesn't seem to be yellow. It's a kind of a light green. But then after a while, you realize it's not green, it's yellow. And the next room may be a red room. And you think when you first go in that it's orange because you've been engrossed in this yellow space. And it's fascinating because in a simple way you realize how subjective our vision is, that we go through life perhaps with colored glasses, if you like. And also it can change and we get new influences. And at the time I didn't really think much more deeply than that, but something inside was as if triggered, and I thought it was very fascinating, very simple piece of art. There's a blue room, and when you first go in, it appears purple, and so on. And so there's a very nice quote by Kant that we go through life with our colored glasses, and we see the world as depending on those glasses. And the question is, what are those glasses? What does that mean? And many things, but basically maybe our identities, our experiences, and also I think the knowledge that we have in our mind that affects how we see the world. So there are many factors involved that have an effect on our perception, and that's what would be nice just to look at. And so to start with our experiences, and just taking a really simple example of an experience that I remember when I see this image of the dog on the beach, my perception is of a lot of fun, childhood memories of taking the dog on the beach and the dog running around, and also some chaos there as well. But it was a nice experience, and I'm just looking at the image, a perception is triggered. But someone else may have had a very bad experience. And it's also depending on the breed of dog, we have different perceptions. If you've had a bad experience, then your perception is, opposite. Perhaps it's fear, danger, and worry might come to mind. That's a simple thing. Another image is, this is relating to the work that I was involved with as a designer, involved with designing shops. So you arrive at the site, the shop, my perception of the designer, and then you meet the builder, and you meet the client, and you meet the merchandising team, and we all have our own perception of that same space. It was one is the perception of, as a designer, we have to look at the small details, and we're measuring it against other designers and their perception. And other builders are thinking of how much this costs, how much time that will take. And we're looking at the same thing, but depending on our role, we see it so differently. And so it's good to be aware of other people's perceptions as well when you're meeting them, and helps perhaps with relationships and communication. And then another thing which I feel with perception is when we have the opportunity to travel or meet people from other cultures, because these days it's important, they call it cultural intelligence, to actually be aware of the perceptions others have when they see the world. And this is an image of a school that I was teaching at, teaching English. And they used to have this regimented routine every day. They would line up and do these exercises. It appeared to be absolutely quite of a force in a way. But what I saw in the children, they were actually quite free in many ways. So my perception was that it's almost from the communist time. This was in Vietnam. They had some structures in place. My perception from a Western background was one thing, but their experience and perception completely different. And I think interestingly as well, perceptions of healing, perceptions of death, very different in different cultures. Western-based psychology might have a perception of how to deal with things, how to deal with trauma. And in Cambodia, where I was working, completely different perception of how to manage, how to move through life, how to succeed. Perceptions of beauty. In Vietnam, when the child was a little bit bigger, they would say very healthy. We might say they need to go on a diet. So perception of health and beauty is different based on history, recent history. And other image, which the image of a train, it's to remind me that information changes our perception. So, for example, this story of a man on a train with his children. And his children at the time, 3 of them were causing disturbance for all the passengers. And they've tolerated it. This was in the UK, so they had quite a reserve of tolerance and they put up with it. But after a while, one of them decided, I need to speak to the father and just say, I'm very sorry, but your children need to be under control. It's causing a disturbance. And he looked a bit apologetic. And he said, well, the thing is, they've just found out their mother has been diagnosed with terminal illness. And so he's obviously processing it, and his children as well. And at that point, everyone's perception changed in such a very no tolerance anymore. The feelings subsequently changed. And after that, their motivation was to play with the children. And the different atmosphere was created. And that's just from information. So that was a perception shift. So it's interesting to know how we change perception. The next slide, which is going into a subject of near-death experiences. And this was image of a lady who actually was told she's going to die of cancer, and she was critically ill, but she had she got near-death experience and an out-of-body experience. And sometimes these huge shifts, when the body is very unwell, we learn a lot. And this was a very extreme example. She actually had a different perception on the whole scene. She was no longer in the fear of the situation. She saw it as if from above, and could perceive the feelings of others. And it's quite interesting to go into near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, because it affects them for their whole life. They have a different attitude towards death, attitude towards connection and human relationships. Often there's more empathy and a wish to help others from these life experiences. And so that can also have a huge effect. And the next image is around perception of a great scientist who feels that we need another planet in the next 100 years, which is a perception based on many facts. There's the environmental damage and many aspects of overpopulation. However, it's just a feeling. If anyone has watched Avatar, the movie, if you go to another place and you take your mindset with you, do we not just take our mindset to that new place? Should we be able to find another planet? And do we not just bring the same amount of need and greed to the new place? So it's interesting that this perception and perspective is there, but it's also interesting to see what is it that we can maybe do on this planet. It's an eminent scientist's opinion, and maybe others have the same. So it leads to the question, especially with technology, the way technology is moving. In a way, it's giving us huge entertainment opportunities, but if in the next 5-10 years we see virtual reality going to mixed reality, we may end up with gadgets which we can blur the boundaries of our perception with technology. And it may be on the one side entertaining, but the other side it may create already what is could be confusing for people in terms of technologies taking away often our connection with our environment, and made that be accentuated even more. So the question which comes to mind, is there a helpful perspective and way to see the world and ourselves? So we have options how we see the world, but is there one which is helpful? And be nice to reflect on this for a moment for ourselves. And one image, you may recognize this gentleman, and it is the actor, you may remember, Superman. And he is quoted as saying that pain is inevitable, but misery is an option. So Christopher Reeves. And to me, that's so very simple, but very hugely powerful. If we really get it, that we actually can experience as in terms of a choice, that something is suffering, worthy of suffering or not. Pain, okay, we definitely get pain. So let us take this image of a young girl, and she may not be suffering physically, but something is going on in the mind. And we can probably say that we have ourselves been in this situation as a child, remember it. Maybe as an adult, we don't show it quite so openly. And what is it that creates this kind of, if you like, mental suffering, not physical? And what is it that we can maybe do to shift our perspective, which can avoid this kind of inner experience? So that's another question to reflect on. Is there a helpful way to see the world? One word that comes up is expectations. Perhaps this girl has had an expectation she will get the cake, or she will go to the party, or she will have something that she has asked for, and something's gone wrong. We create an expectation. What is the result? What is your perspective when your expectations are not met? So there's one reflection. So many feelings and thoughts. Unmet expectations may bring many different feelings. Obviously, anger and sadness, but also disorientation. This may come when we have expectations on other people and they don't behave like expect. It can be disorientating. You think, where am I at with this person? Maybe without realizing we've created an expectation on their behavior. So I think it's useful to spend a few moments to reflect on this department of expectations, because it obviously has a huge effect on our quality of life, the perception that we have this expectation. So the first is expectations of others. And this first example may be of the teacher who spends extra time to help a student, and she does it from the heart, or he, and gives the work, and they run away without saying thank you, they're just off. And without knowing it, an expectation may have been created of just some ordinary manners. But if the expectation was created, it could ruin the day. It could be like, I did all that and there was no thank you. So we become subservient, really, to the situation. We may have expectation, as was said, of someone's behavior. We have in our mind a relationship of happiness, but they may act in a totally different way, and we become disorientated. Expectation of them agreeing with us. And also, maybe you have an expectation of on others that they will invite us to something. They'll invite us to that drinks party. I was invited last time. Why? And we hear about it, say on Facebook. I wasn't invited to that. What happened? And we can cause quite a sorrow actually, and it's an expectation. So it's really interesting to reflect on this one aspect of other expectations on others. And then we have expectations on matter, on the physical. If you live in somewhere that's flat like Cambridge, you have expectation a bicycle will work. And 8 o'clock in the evening when it's raining and it's dark, you think it will work, but maybe it doesn't, and that's the time we don't realize we've created an expectation. Of course, on all our possessions we have all the white goods or the gadgets. It's when it goes wrong, we might think sort of, mm, our senses is punishing me. Why indignation? I should have these things all working all the time, but we don't realize perhaps expectation has been created. And also expectation on our own bodies that we won't get toothache when we go on holiday. We won't have some kind of we think this is not right, but anything can happen in this world, and one sign of spiritual intelligence is to expect the unexpected. So maybe that's a freedom from expectations. And finally, expectations of ourselves. That can be the hardest one. We maybe mistake having a high goal or a high vision with a sense of burden that I have to prove myself, I have to constantly succeed. And it's good to have the goal, but maybe not the heaviness of expectation, because in this example of a teacher giving a class who has an expectation of the lesson, that can create a burden on the students as an expectation that the students will definitely fulfill the high demand. So as was said, a vision of the students doing a great job is one thing, but maybe not that I'll be happy if or when this goes well. Then it's that could be a strain on everybody. And then you have expectations maybe on oneself. I used to have this observation of being entertaining. I have to show myself to be a good company and tell not necessarily jokes, but some aspect of being entertaining. That can be heaviness. We're not natural when we're doing that. Sometimes we might just want to be quiet and listen. And obviously, finally, an expectation of academic success. Older brother or sister has done well, and we have this heaviness. Again, it may be that we're not ourselves when we have this kind of expectation. We might not be free to see who we really are within all of that. So the question is there an answer to expectations? There must be a simple way. So what would you say to that? Is there an answer to expectations? And one aspect is well known in positive psychology is gratitude, to experience gratitude. And this is the perspective. One easy way would be the perspective that everything is a gift. It's easy to say it, but one thing maybe to try to experiment, because someone might do 10 good things and one wrong thing. And the mind may naturally go to that one wrong thing because it makes us feel insecure. But it's possible to shift to the 10 good things. And actually, that's closer to reality in a sense, even at the level of ordinary life. And so there are aspects, expectation can be counteracted by other thought patterns. I'm glad that something went well today. I'm glad that this did work. That I didn't have toothache today. How many times have we thought, how great, I don't have toothache today. When we have toothache, we know all about it. But to wake up in the morning and appreciation of that body works well. Okay, maybe something is a little stiff or pain, but we can actually shift our thinking very quickly. Our perspective shifts, and we see the brighter side. But it helps, I feel, not to have this in piecemeal, because we can apply that as a sticking plaster. But is there a really clear, solid way to see ourselves and the world, which holds the perspective of gratitude in a natural way. Is that something we can get into? And so, one perspective we have the option for is to see this world as a guest. It's a very deep, very subtle contemplation which we use in meditation. And those who are practicing meditation, who want to shift the perspective in a very easy way, is to acknowledge that this is a world of constant change and everything has some kind of end to it at some point. We don't know how it will end. It's a perspective which actually acknowledges the nature of the way things are in this world. People and places and jobs, they all have this property of change, growth, and then also life cycle. And if I see with the glasses of a guest, it's gratitude is actually natural and normal. But more importantly, I'm connected to something more in a subtle way, which takes experimenting with for yourself. Place of peace. So, some reflections on perspective. So I think we have some questions. I'm sure there are many questions.
One comment and question. I think knowing what my need is important at the same time. I mean, maybe that expectation may not be necessarily a must.
I think if I understand the comment and question, it's very, very important to acknowledge whatever does come up, because when we've created an expectation, and we can observe lots of reactions to it. So it's really important to take the signal in a sense, but also to really make the muscles strong of being able to shift perspective, so we can get a little, sometimes a little distance. Often when we're in the third person perspective, we become much clearer, just like when you're talking to a friend, you might see something more clearly than they do. So see one perspective, understand it, and then try another perspective. It's often quite insightful. Yeah. So this may be a nice opportunity to really try to catch a perspective which we can play with. We have this ability to choose perspective, which is what has been so interesting and in exploration of meditation. So for the next 2 minutes, let's create some attention. It's always good to start by really acknowledging the body, so relaxing the body, the shoulders and the toes, and to create this awareness that right now I am a guest. So in the same way, you may be visiting a place, you walk into the room, you use everything in that room, but you know you have an entrance and you have a journey, you have an exit. You are associated with everything, but your world is something more. In the same way, to acknowledge that the being is a guest in this physical world, this experience of the physical. Unless we have a plan to stay here, we are guests. It is like a totally new perspective, seeing from the guest We as if see it lightly and observe those feelings. When we see above and beyond, we are connected to a bigger picture. We can see that the physical world with its change and end is limited. But in the silence, stillness of the guest, we become connected to something unlimited, inner peace, beyond a sense of change. Perspective of the observer, of the guest. This guest comes with fresh pair of eyes, fresh sense of appreciation, knowing the limitations of this physical world, playing a part on that stage, the world of actions, but also feeling connected to something more. The guest has a home, and in this spiritual model, that is a place of peace, beyond change and beyond sound. Thank you. So the invitation is to experiment with the meditation. It's really one's own experience that shows what perspective may be right or may lead to a good quality of life.